Good evening, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our regular meeting of the Board of Education for May 22nd, 2023. And at this time, I would ask Mrs. Jarvis if she would help us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Would you like to do roll call first?
Oh, that'd probably be a good idea.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we'll do roll call first.
Mrs. Acosta. Here. Mrs. Bradford.
Here.
Mrs. Burton.
Here.
Mrs. Frank.
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Here.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, we have a quorum.
Did I say says yes?
Yes.
Oh, I'm here.
Now, Mrs. Jarvis, if you would help us in the pledge.
Gladly. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, I want to welcome everyone to our regular meeting. If you want to follow along tonight with our agenda, you can go out the door to my left and turn to the right, and you see a table that has both the agendas and our blue slips for anyone who would like to address the board during audience communication. We are going to make one adjustment to the agenda. I should also say, if you're watching from home, you can go to our website, which is livoniapublicschools.org, highlight over the board tab, and you'll see board meeting information. And if you drop down there, you can see the agenda. We are making one adjustment to the agenda. We are going to move items 6A and B, which are appointment of our student services coordinators and the appointment of assistant principal at Churchill High School, up to between item 3A and 3B. So we will take up those matters right after recognition of our National Merit Scholars. With all that said, again, this is our regular meeting, and we always like to tell you that some of the items that come before the board tonight at this meeting have already been discussed at 2 prior meetings, and you will not hear the level of discussion on those items at the board table tonight because we have done that in depth at probably 2 other meetings. We urge you to go and watch our committee of the whole meetings. Those are the ones where we really get into the discussions. We talk about the matters, any issues that we may have with an item before it comes to us for a vote. We have generally worked those items out before it gets here, so you won't hear the level of discussion as you would here. One of the other things that we take very, very seriously is our community with character. And one of the characters under that is respect. And I know people that watch television nowadays, you don't see a lot of respect between people. And that's really a sad thing. But here at the board, we respect each other. We don't always agree with each other. But we will discuss it, and we respect each other's opinions, and we will respect anyone who comes before the board to speak, and we ask in return that you respect the board as well. I think that's the best way to teach our children how to act and treat one another. So we hold that very, very high on our list of things. As I indicated, I will try now and go through the agenda the way it should and not miss items. We've done the pledge, so we're going to go into communications, which is item 3A, recognition of National Merit Scholars. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Jenkins. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, President Johnson, members of the board, Superintendent Oquist. Tonight it is my pleasure to recognize a special group of students who have excelled in the National Merit Scholarship Program. National Merit is an academic competition for recognition and for scholarships, and the program has been in place since 1955. This year, we are recognizing 4 LPS students who have scored in the top 1% out of approximately 1.6 million students nationwide on the PSAT National Merit Scholarship qualifying exam. Because it is May, and our schedules are quite crowded these days, unfortunately, 3 out of our 4 honorees were unable to join us this evening due to conflicts in their schedules. However, of course, we will still recognize them and make sure that they receive their certificates. I always like to let you know what the certificates say. So it says Livonia Public Schools Certificate of Recognition, Outstanding Achievement, National Merit Scholarship Program, and then the student's name and whether they were a finalist or a semifinalist. Selected by the National Merit Scholarship Corporation for outstanding academic success on the preliminary SAT National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. Dated May 22nd, 2023, signed by Superintendent Oquist and Board President Mark Johnson. So we will distribute those to the three who are unable to join us. We'll make sure that they receive those. So I'm so thankful that we do have one of our honorees here with us tonight. If I could please ask Melissa Barbette to join me at the podium. Hi, Melissa.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. So Melissa is a senior at Churchill High School, where she is in the Math, Science, and Computers program. She is a in the National Merit. She was a semifinalist and a finalist, and also a scholarship recipient in the program. At Churchill, Melissa is active in Quiz Bowl. She's in the Girls STEM Club, Robotics, National Honor Society, and the National English Honor Society. She said being a part of the MSc program at Churchill has opened up a lot of doors for her, both socially and academically. Melissa plans to attend the University of Michigan Ann Arbor, go blue, to study computer science, and she plans to pursue a career in software design. She has been awarded with the Marie Curie Award for Excellence in Science and Mathematics and the Grand Rapids Girls Robotics Competition Scholarship. We wish you all the very best, Melissa, and we are so proud of your accomplishments. And thank you for being here. Can we have a round of applause for Melissa? There you are. Thank you very much. Next, we are pleased to recognize Franklin High School senior Gavin Bullock. Gavin was a finalist and a scholarship recipient in the National Merit Scholarship Program. At Franklin, Gavin is on the varsity tennis team and serves as senior captain. He received the National Merit Scholarship to attend the University of South Florida with all fees paid, which is so cool. He plans to study applied mathematics. He plans to pursue a career as an actuary following graduation from USF. Gavin said that his LPS experience has been one of great support all around. Congratulations, Gavin, and we'll make sure that you receive your certificate. Next up, it's my pleasure to recognize Churchill High School senior Alexandra Curley. Alexandra was a finalist in the National Merit Scholarship Program. At Churchill, she is involved in several programs and organizations, including the Math National Honor Society, the National English Honor Society, AmeriCorps Volunteer Program, and she is the co-founder of the Churchill Ping Pong Club. She plans to attend the University of Michigan to study earth and environmental science. Alexandra said she loved participating in the MSc program at Churchill because it enabled her to explore different STEM topics of study. Congratulations to Alexandra. And last but not least, we're pleased to recognize Jackson Pittman, who is a senior at Churchill High School. Jackson was a semifinalist in the National Merit Scholarship Program. His extracurricular activities include playing guitar, piano, bass, banjo, and the mandolin. He also enjoys composing music, drawing, and animation. He plans to attend Wayne State University and major in music composition, and his future career goal is to compose music for visual arts. Jackson has said having a music teacher at Churchill who is a Grammy nominee, having a music teacher who organized the jazz band to play at Cliff Bell's downtown, and having the University of Michigan drumline coach as the Churchill drumline coach offered him opportunities to grow his music career. Congratulations to Jackson, and we will be keeping an eye on your future, Jackson, and we'll be able to say that we knew you when. Congratulations. That concludes my somewhat brief National Merit Scholarship presentation. If you'd please join me again in congratulating all 4 of our honorees.
And I would just say that anyone who sees this, get a hold of them and have them watch this meeting just so they see the recognition. I think it's important that they do
I
that.
plan to send the families a link to tonight's meeting.
Excellent.
Yes,
Thank
for
you.
sure.
One other item that I forgot to mention, we are going to take a break after item 3B, the district update from the superintendent, so that we can personally congratulate those who are being appointed and recognized this evening. So thank you. So that will now take us to one of the moved items, and this will be 6A, appointment of student services coordinator. May I have a motion, please?
Please. President Johnson?
Miss-
President Johnson?
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Nicole West and Caitlin Vermeer as student services coordinators beginning August 1st, 2023.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And Mrs. Keats will be helping us with that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I am excited to present to you tonight 2 recommendations for student services coordinators, the first of whom is Nicole West. Nicole West is no stranger to special education, as she has been working in Dearborn Public Schools for the last 17 years as a special education teacher and most recently coordinator. She started her career as an ASD teacher, and she served in the role of coordinator in Dearborn since 2017. There, she supervised autism spectrum disorder programs, early childhood special education programs, adapted PE, school psychologist, 504s, resource programming, and I'm sure the list goes on and on and on. Nicole comes to us with a Bachelor of Science in Special Education with an emotional impairment specialty from Eastern Michigan, as well as a Master of Special Education with a specialty in autism spectrum disorders from Oakland University, and a School Administrator Certificate from Grand Valley. Her references were glowing from Dearborn. I know they are so sad to lose her, but we are so excited to welcome her to the Livonia Public Schools family, as she is now a new Livonia resident, and her child will be going to Hoover in the fall. So we feel like she is certainly coming home to us. So I wish to recommend Nicole West for one of the student services coordinator positions this evening. And the second one I will bring to you this evening is Caitlin Vermeer. And Caitlin has been with us since 2020, serving as an autism spectrum disorder coach. She has worked in special education for the last decade, serving in Nashville Public Schools and Troy Public Schools as a special education teacher before coming to us. She also has served as a behavior technician in Royal Oak outside of the public school setting. While she's been in Livonia, she has managed to make wonderful relationships with teachers, administrators, and students alike, as she has served in and out of schools for the last 3 years with us. She has a Bachelor of Elementary Education with a cognitive impairment specialty from Central. She has a Master of Behavior Analysis from Ball State, and she is continuing her education at Grand Valley as well. So we're so excited to recommend Caitlin Vermeer this evening to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Questions or comments from the board at this time? Mrs. Oquist?
Yes, thank you. Well, as you know, we have an exceptional student services department. We are so proud of the work that they do on behalf of our students each and every day. And we have a couple of important folks from that team. One, Dr. Stephen Taylor. We brought his retirement to the board last month. We certainly wish him well, and that the loss of his talents created one of the vacancies in as a coordinator position. And then Mrs. Megan Sproul, who you approved in the fall to become principal at Garfield Community School, created the second vacancy. And so that is no small feat to find folks who can fill such big shoes. But we had a very able team led by Dr. Terriel, members of our Leads organization, as well as members of Cabinet, who talked to quite a few administrators and candidates from across this region. And we are so pleased to be bringing you both Caitlin and Nicole this evening. They are coming to us with a wide variety of experiences, a commitment to the children that they serve, and a collaborative nature with their colleagues, which we know will fit right in with our wonderful team in student services. So we couldn't be more thrilled to bring the recommendation to you this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Other questions or comments? No. Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton for the appointment of student services coordinators. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Congratulations. Would you like to say a few words?
I just wanted to thank the board.
Just tap it. There you go.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the board, Superintendent Jen Terriel, as well as everybody else on the interview committee who believed in me. Like Ms. Keats had said, I'm coming from Dearborn. I had spent my whole career over there, and so it's a little bit bittersweet, but I moved to Livonia in Halloween weekend. And I've already got things rolling. I got my library card right away, my rec membership right away. And so being able to now be part of the Livonia Public Schools, I think that's really the full package for me. To be able to give back to my own community is very important. And now that my own children are going to be coming to the district as well, it just makes me very thankful for this opportunity. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
So first, I want to say thank you to the board, Superintendent Oquist and Dr. Terriel, for your time, not just tonight, but over the whole interview process as well. And I would also like to, I'm very grateful for the other student services coordinators who have been like mentors to me throughout my 3 years in Livonia Public Schools. So I am very excited to work with all of you, with the other administrators, families, and most importantly, the students here at Livonia. So thank you very much.
We are thrilled to have you. Okay, that takes us now to item 6B, appointment of assistant principal at Churchill High School. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson?
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and appoint Todd Kalmbach as assistant principal at Churchill High School beginning August 2, 2023.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Frank. And this is going to be Mr. Abate.
It is. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I have the distinct privilege of reintroducing our own Todd Kalmbach for a brand new role here in, not a new role to us, but a new role to him, here in LPS as assistant principal at Churchill High School. So as you all know, Todd joined us in 2021 as a coordinator of student services. He has been the lead for secondary resource programs and local centers in our 6 secondary buildings. We're on the secondary buildings that house local centers and, of course, the resource programs. He has been impressive from day one with his knowledge, with his confidence, with his charisma. Anyone you run into in this district who's spent some time working with Todd, whether it was being in a meeting with him or strategizing for student needs or what have you, will tell you how enjoyable that has been and what a genuine person he is. He shows up here every day for kids. He's here for kids. He's here for his colleagues. He's here for LPS every day without fail. He's unwaveringly positive and really has been a very valued member of that tight-knit student services team. So I know they're bummed to see him leave their group. But you know, he filled in for Nicole Hunter for a little while over there at Churchill, and you know, Charger Nation got in his blood a little bit. He got to spend some time with kids on a daily basis, and of course, he was when he joined us from White Lake, had been an assistant principal prior. So you know, just remembering what that felt like to be in the mix with our kiddos on a daily basis. You know, kind of gave him a whole new outlook, a whole new energy, and he just had to take it. And so we just think he's really uniquely suited to fill that role now with his extensive special ed background, both here and in prior districts. And he's now, you know, the Churchill team, which is dynamic in itself, has had some flux with some movement, and they are whole again with Todd joining them, and they're going to do great things. So we're very excited for Todd. We're very excited for Churchill, and congratulations. Happy to recommend Todd Kalmbach as assistant principal of Churchill High School.
Thank you for that, Mr. Abate. Any questions or comments from the board? I'm assuming Mrs. Oquist has a few things to say.
Mrs. Frank?
Mrs. Frank?
Welcome to Charger Nation. My son is a freshman at Churchill, and so we've just as a family, gotten to know Charger Nation and just the amazing staff there. And so I know that you know that, but it is a fantastic school, and I know they are thrilled to have you to complete their team. So welcome. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Now, Mrs.
We are indeed, as you might recall, a couple of years ago, we were thrilled to bring Mr. Kalmbach to your attention and recommendation for appointment as part of our student services team, and felt very fortunate to have someone of his character, someone of his expertise, and someone who is, again, unwaveringly committed to the students he serves. And we believe that the experience that he's had here with us these past couple of years, as well as the short time at Churchill, has shown him to be the absolutely right person at the right time in this position. So we are very excited about this appointment. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the administrators who are here this evening. We have members of our student services team, members of our Churchill team. We have our Leeds president. We have wonderful Mrs. Roberts, our amazing secretary at Churchill. If all the folks here to support our administrative candidates would please stand up and be recognized. Thank you. We are grateful, and I think that is one of the things, sometimes when we talk to our administrative candidates as they're coming in and meeting with us, and we're meeting in the final round, one of the things I always want to spend time talking about is our administrative leadership team. And it can sound a bit intimidating when we say we're 70 strong across the district, especially if folks are coming from a smaller district. But this is what it means. It means having your colleagues next to you during challenging times, having your colleagues next to you to celebrate you, having your colleagues next to you to be a thought partner. It is one of the things that makes LPS so special. So thanks for being here tonight, and Todd, we're thrilled to bring you back on board in this new capacity.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any other questions or comments? The only comment that I would make is, seems like every time we send somebody over for a couple of months, they end up staying. We have to be a little careful in the future. Congratulations, you're gonna love it over there. Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mrs. Frank, to approve the appointment of assistant principal at Churchill High School. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Benefield says yes. Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you and congratulations.
Do you want to have Todd come up? Do you want to Mr. Kalmbach come up?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. A lot of kind words that I wasn't really prepared to hear tonight, but thank you, Tony, and everybody else. But first, I want to thank the board. Livonia, to me, was kind of presented to me many years ago by other friends and colleagues that work here as a place that you have to work. This is a destination-type district. This is a place that has great culture and great people. And being here now for 2 years, that is absolutely true. It is 100% truth, and that's thanks to the board, because it starts at the top, and that kind of feel and that culture always trickles down to other leadership, trickles down to the teachers and the staff and everybody that we have supporting our kids on a daily basis. So thank you for that. Thank you for Superintendent Oquist for believing in me with this slide over to Churchill High School to round out the amazing team that's already there, very dynamic, very much student-centered. And when I spent the 6 weeks there as just filling in, I learned really quickly that all of us are kind of cut from the same cloth in regards to our beliefs about students and how we support students and what we do on a daily basis. So it feels really good to go join that team, yet it's also very bittersweet because I'm leaving a team that is phenomenal. So, and also congratulations to you ladies to join such a well-established, awesome team led by Dr. Terriall. I do have to thank Dr. Terriall from the bottom of my heart for all the support. She's put so much interest and dedication into me in the last 2 years to bring me on board, to learn the world of special education from Oakland County to Wayne County is a little bit different. So a lot of times we had a lot of meetings together and a lot of just support that I will always be grateful for. And that information will not go to waste because at Churchill High School, as we know, has a lot of programs that support students with special needs. So I look forward to being a shoulder partner with the team, the coordinating team that will be there on a daily basis and kind of working in conjunction with them. One quick story about Dr. Terriall that I have to share and that I will never, ever, ever forget is after the Churchill stint, I went and met with her and I said, Dr. T, I said, I really enjoyed my time there and I think I want to throw my hat in the ring for applying for the Churchill position. And she didn't say anything for about 5 seconds. It felt like 5 years. But the first thing she said, and I will always remember this, is she goes, Todd, you will always be a member of our student services team. And that is true. Like I said, we're all one team. Like you said, Superintendent Oquist, we have a lot of people, administrators that work together that support everybody. Without further ado, last person I'd like to thank is my wife, who is here tonight. She is a nurse in Livonia as well, so we both get out of bed every single day to kind of support people in the city that we love. So if it wasn't for her, I don't know if I could take the step and do commit to a job like this with all the night events and all the different things going on. We have a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old at home, so she's the glue that holds us all together. So I said this 2 years ago. I kind of ended with a statement. I'm going to end with it again. Thank you guys, thank you all, and Cabinet for allowing me to continue to do work that's worth doing. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move now to item 3B, our district update from the superintendent. I'll turn it over to Mrs. Oquist.
Thanks so much, President Johnson, and I will invite you to turn your attention to one of the screens in the room. We'll share some great updates from across Livonia Public Schools. So we always start with wonderful opportunities to see our kiddos learn and grow, and we see some of our sweet kindergarten faces here, and they look like almost first graders, don't they? Yes. This is the best part. So we see our kindergartners begin to transition, and when you're in the classroom, it is a different world from where they were in September. And so our kindergarten teachers work miracles, and so they are ready to head to first grade very soon. We had a talking zoo highlighted at Roosevelt, and we see some of our kiddos here sharing information, and as folks came up to them, they were able to share information about the zoo animal that they had researched. And here we have some of our Churchill High School students, so those might look familiar to some of our faces in the crowd from Mrs. King's advanced chem class as they conducted experiments. And this was a great opportunity for our students in our visually impaired program to really have an opportunity to use their skills in a real-life way at Detroit Metro Airport. And a wonderful job. I was so sorry I had another commitment and missed it last Friday, but the Western Wayne Skills Center, their spring craft show, I know I always leave there with so many wonderful things, but just want to congratulate Mrs. Sproul and the whole team over there and all of our creative students. You see some tote bags that were for sale, and I assume it was a wonderful event. Here we have some of our Riley kiddos. So chess has made a resurgence, if you did not know. It really has, with young people, young adults, and so we have some kiddos here learning in the classroom as well as after school in their chess club. And this is one of a handful of schools that have begun chess clubs and have become very popular once again. And here we have Stevenson's Law and Justice class. So they recently had their mock trial. You see the prosecution on the left, In the middle, we have the young men, who is our judge, and on the right, our defense team. So these are great real-life type of opportunities for these classes, and a really high-interest activity in which our students participate. And we have some of our Western Wayne Skills Center students. They were there shopping at the craft show on Friday, and we see some very happy faces with some pretty cool purchases. And I know some of you were able to attend the Matsuri Festival. Each spring they host this at Nijiiro. It's a traditional Japanese festival, and always tons of family participation, and a great day for our students to participate in this special tradition each spring. Jackson held its first 5K run. I'm going to say that's ambitious when you think about early childhood kiddos, right? They have a lot of energy, but 5K is a ways to go. So it was really cool to have more than 50 families participating in this fun run and a wide variety of other activities. So good for all of those families who are out there getting some exercise. And lots of spring sports success. So we had many successful athletes who are going to be moving on to states. We had the regional track meet hosted by Stevenson this year. So we have Franklin's 4x4 team here. Congratulations, they were named all-conference. And we have sprinter Dominic Lemon, a 4-time all-conference sprinter. So we don't have pics of all of our kiddos, but we will get them in a compilation for the end of the year. But lots of spring sports success the past few weeks. We had Stevenson's girls tennis were named city champs. And both the Livonia United lacrosse boys and girls teams are the KLAA East Division champs. So congratulations to all of them, and continue to have success with a relatively new program, but we're thrilled to see them moving forward. And here you see our very happy Franklin JV and varsity baseball teams, division champs. So long record of success coming out of the Patriots, so happy to see that. And wonderful, our United Bocce team has had an absolute blast, a beautiful day here. And I believe they have a big event this week, is that right? Yes. Tomorrow? Okay. That is... like a big tournament? Is that a big tournament? It's a big tournament. Okay, a big tournament. Tomorrow, so good luck to our LPS Unified Bocce team. How cool is that?
Do we know where it will be?
Where is it?
It's at United Wholesale Mortgage, right? In Pontiac. Yes.
Wow, okay.
All right. So you know that we have 5 schools that started elementary robotics teams this year. And some of you were able to see the Buchanan team on display last week at the STEAM event last week. So we had our brand new competition robotics teams in their first competition this past weekend at Riverside Elementary in Dearborn Heights. So there were 28 teams there. And they were able to rock and roll all day long with their robots. And so we'll see some slides here from our students who were pictured. And we have our 5 schools, our Buchanan, Cleveland, Hoover, Nijiiro, and Webster. So they're in the first Lego League, is their league. So it's FLL, and their first competition was this past weekend. So congratulations to all of them. And you see, I think the middle picture are some of our students as well from Buchanan, and they had their robots on display when we were there last week. So congratulations to all of them, and pretty cool in their first year to already be in a competition and participating with really strong numbers. Lots of thank yous coming your way. So we had Staff Appreciation Week at each of our schools, and I just have to say our PTAs do an amazing job. So you'll see some highlights here from across the district, and many of those are thanks to the amazing PTAs and all of the donations that have been given from the community. So you know we absolutely adore our staff. They are the best, and so it was great to see them celebrated throughout the month of May. And we also, I think this is a great thing because we know our officials are becoming few and far between. So a great opportunity for our student athletes and our coaches to show their gratitude to our game officials, and so important, and to thank them for their service. So I want to thank our athletic administrators who help coordinate this and to make sure that our students are taking time to say thank you to these officials who give their time so our kiddos can participate. So important that we are all respectful to our officials during games and competitions. Congratulations coming your way. We had two of our wonderful members of the transportation team. Ross Robert, you'll see on the left, he's one of our mechanics, and Nikki Wolf is one of our drivers. They were both honored with the Wayne County Excellence in Transportation Award. And I believe we had 14 members of the transportation department who were nominated. And these are nominations made by their peers. And so they are nominated by their peers, and then they are selected, and there's an event held in Wayne County for all of those who are awardees and being honored. So wonderful to see both Ross and Nikki receive this special honor, and they are both tremendous contributors to our transportation department. With lots of signing days, so here you see Eric Hobson, who's going to be playing basketball at Indiana Tech, so congratulations to him. So again, we've seen a number of different signing days at each of our 3 high schools, and many thanks to our ADs and everyone involved in putting those together to highlight our student athletes. And we had, you've seen this familiar face, Mackenzie Soroki. She was one of 12 finalists statewide for High School Female Athlete of the Year. So the Detroit Athletic Club always hosts a large event. There were 6 females, 6 males, and she was one of the DAC Athlete of the Year finalists. And as you know, she is headed to Tennessee to start her swimming career and hopefully make it to the Olympics. So congratulations to Mackenzie. Some more pictures from Churchill's signing day. So there were 12 athletes up on the stage who will be competing at the collegiate level. That is no easy task. It is hard enough to do in high school to manage with their scholastic pursuits, but to do that at the next level is a pretty big deal. So we had a number of our students celebrated recently for their accomplishments. Stevenson always celebrates their day, their college day, or next plans ahead. And so they recently held that at Stevenson, and then oftentimes staff members who had gone to that school or are proud alum will take pictures together. So you see some of our state universities represented there with lots of excited students ready to head off in the fall. And the Star Awards are going strong. I'm sure you've seen them on social media. So as you know, Mrs. Jarvis is the president of our LPS Education Foundation, and the Star Awards have just been flowing. And it's a great way for parents, for colleagues, for students to recognize our hardworking staff from across the district. You see a few of them here, and I believe it's primarily Mrs. Ulasic who heads out to take photos, but I think Mrs. Grammatico and Mrs. Beringhouse have also been helping to deliver these special surprises. And it's also a fundraiser for our foundation, so definitely a win-win, and congratulations to all who have been acknowledged. We had Coach V achieved his 100th win as coach of our Lady Chargers softball team. That's a pretty big deal, so great to see that and to celebrate him. And we had a vocational award from Teresa Lila. She was one of our students in the advanced graphic design class, and she was highlighted from Franklin High School. And the Rotary Club, as you know, both the AM Rotary and the Noontime Rotary are both phenomenal supporters of our students. And so they regularly select students from the Livonia Career Technical Center to highlight. And we had the pleasure of hosting Teresa and her parents a couple of weeks ago. Mr. Francis and I have been on the road. We have been on the 30-year award circuit. So we've highlighted a number of different staff. I think we have 15 or 17 total. So we've been heading out and celebrating members of our LPS staff who have been with us for 30 years, and they receive a very nice award and a pin. And it's been fun to go out and share these with their classes. And the students are always pretty excited to to see their teachers recognized, or any staff members recognized in this way. So we were at Franklin, Jackson, Garfield, Stevenson. I think we have some on the next page. We had 4 at Johnson last week, if you can believe it.
Here.
We were here, yes, we were here with Mrs. Boca. We can go on to the next slide. There we go. I think we had 4 last Friday over at Johnson Upper Elementary. So lots of familiar faces and lots of connections throughout the district. And look at Mr. Evan Jenkins on the stage. He earned a 10-minute solo with the Detroit Youth Symphony, and he wowed everyone in attendance. So he is very thankful to his current and former orchestra teachers, Mr. Quackenbush and Mrs. Searhall. They both came to support him, as did many members of his proud family. So it was wonderful, and I'm certain many, many days and hours of hard work went into that 10-minute solo experience. So congratulations to Evan, who will be crossing the stage at the USA Hockey Arena soon as a graduate from Franklin. And we have some recognition of our Churchill Unified peers. So we have many students who serve as peers in the Unified Athletic Program. They were recently honored at the Wayne County PAC Award Night, and it was wonderful to hear about their contributions. And I believe they were nominated by Kara Clark, is that right, Dr. T?
Yes.
And so she was able to highlight them, and here's a picture of our very deserving kiddos, again recognized by the Wayne County Parent Advisory Council. And it was a great week last week with many special honors nights and graduations. So the Franklin Transition Program had their graduation and spent time celebrating each of our students in this wonderful program, and also sharing some special observations and comments by peers, which was very touching. We had Churchill Honors Night, many students on stage recognized by the Churchill admin team, and I will tell you from each of our schools, I'm not sure when our kiddos sleep because they are involved in so many things, and we have one of our wonderful Churchill students here this evening who was also recognized. So you'll see some photos from Churchill and a great evening at Franklin and of course at Stevenson. So many of our seniors being recognized. Each school, I was sharing with the administrators, has their own unique way of doing things, but each night was so special. So thank you to each and every person who contributes toward putting together the program, getting the students ready on stage and getting everything organized. It is no small feat to pull off nights like this, but it is not only really special to our students who are recognized, but for their parents as well. So great to celebrate our kids. We had Night of Reflections. There's Mrs. Bradford perusing the art, and Mrs. Jarvis was our MC. So the theme was Show Your Voice, and so we were wowed by our students, whether it was artwork or music, dance composition, writing, absolutely fantastic. So lots of opportunities to celebrate our LPTSA Reflections Council participants. And a few last reminders to mark your calendar. The golf outing, we are almost sold out, so there are a few more spots. The first first time they are holding a golf outing, it will be Sunday, July 23rd, if you would like to join the foundation for this wonderful fundraiser. And remember, high school graduations are around the corner. Thursday the 1st is Franklin, Friday the 2nd, Stevenson, and Churchill at noon on Sunday the 4th. We are certainly looking forward to that, one of the best events of the year. So thanks so much, President Johnson. Lots happening in May, but we are thrilled to share that with you.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. And at this time, as promised, we are going to take a short 5 to 10 minute recess to recognize our honorees tonight, and we will be back shortly. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome back. We are now concluded with our slight recess, and my computer just jumped on me. Give me 2 seconds. There we go. We will move on with our agenda at this time, and we will move to item 3C, written communications. I do not have any written communications. Are there any written communications? Seeing none, we'll move on to 3D, response to prior audience communication. There are no response to prior audience communications. We'll move on to 3E, our audience communications portion. This is the time of our meeting when the board listens to the community. Anyone who wants to address the board can do so. I would point out at this time that the board has 3 primary roles within the district. One is to set policy for the district, another is to hire and evaluate our superintendent, and the third is to align our funding priorities to the district's goals. If you're coming before the board tonight to speak and your issue relates to one of those 3 areas, you can expect a response from the board. Everything else is what we call day-to-day operations, and if your issue is related to a day-to-day operation, then you will receive a response from our administration. We allow 3 minutes per speaker, and Mrs. Bradford will have her timer. You will hear a tone at the end of 3 minutes. We would expect at that time, out of respect to the other speakers, that you wrap up your comments at that point, and then we can move on to the next speaker. With that, I have 3 blue slips tonight. And the first that I have is Drew Buati. Good evening. Just tap. There you go.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, Board of Education, Superintendent Oquist. My name is Drew Buati, and I am the current senior class president at Stevenson High School for the class of 2023. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to the board about the LPS Industrial Arts Program. First, let me say I have taken over 14 industrial arts classes since middle school. Those classes truly have changed my life. Before middle school, I had no clue how to use different saws, different pieces of equipment. I had no clue how to use basic hand tools, measure, or read a ruler. That all changed after Holmes Middle School when I had my great teacher, Mr. Huff, who taught me so much, and I actually still keep in touch with him today. So I learned so much from him that he inspired me to build my own workshop in my basement, and that is still one of my favorite hobbies today. If I never took that class, I would never be involved with the hobby that I am taking. I enjoyed that class so much, I ended up taking it again in 8th grade. After 8th grade, Mr. Huff inspired me, like I said, to build my own shop in my basement, where I do a lot of woodworking projects when I have my free time. When I started at Stevenson High School, I took a wood shop class again, first semester. I built up a great relationship with the teacher, Mr. Bryden, and I have spent hours and hours in the wood shop and the auto shop cleaning and organizing and bettering the program over the last 4 years. I was doing this throughout high school, and I kept taking more and more industrial arts classes. I took auto repair, woods, advanced woods, drafting, small engines, and I've been independent studies for most of those. Each class I took, I learned more and more different skills. I learned how to build an engine and diagnose issues. I learned about different car parts and basic car repairs. I learned how to hand draw floor plans. I also learned how to become an analytical thinker. That being said, there is something that I have been noticing. This program is underutilized and underappreciated. I have noticed the downwards trend throughout each school year of the industrial arts program. The 4 amazing industrial arts teachers are spread too thin, in my opinion, and I'm seeing this program slowly fade away, and I don't want it to die out. I believe that if LPS enhances this program, good things will come. I believe that there are really important skills to be learned to and that are exposed to when they're middle and high school. These classes are stepping stones, I believe, for the Livonia Career and Tech Center, and these classes give students ideas if they would like to go to the Career Center. It would also be great to see more students take these courses. I understand enrollment is not the same as it's been in the past, and that there are more state requirements. That being said, even with the times changing and technology changing, these skills will always be needed in modern society. After telling you my benefits from being a part of this program my last 6 years in Livonia Public Schools, my question for you, the board, where do you see this program in 5 years from now? Where do you see this program long-term? And most importantly, what is the direction the school district is taking the industrial arts program? I would love to go more in depth with this conversation, because this conversation will take a while. So that being said, I want to say thank you so much for the time. I greatly appreciate it, and I look forward to continuing this conversation, and I look forward to continuing talking with the board. And I do have pictures in here of my shop in my basement, so if I can leave that
Thank
right
you.
there, is that okay?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Boyd.
so much, I appreciate
you.
it. No, thank you.
Next, I have Colleen Badgerow. Good evening.
Is it still on?
It is.
Okay. As you said, my name is Colleen Badger. I want to start by thanking President Johnson for your email today that I received in response to my comments at the last board meeting I attended in support of diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the district. Upon learning last week that the decision was made to not fill the DEI facilitator vacancy, I was initially pretty disappointed, but after processing, I became flooded with curiosity and questions and a desire to learn more about how the plan to move forward with this vital work by diffusing responsibility through the MTSS staff and elevating the PTA DEI committee could work. So I reached out to many individuals that I've worked alongside, including other parents, PTA leaders, teachers from the Engagement and Equity Committee, DEI professionals in education, and LPS district leaders to ask questions and learn more about their perspectives and their concerns and find their recommendations for the best path to move forward to meet the needs of all our students. Without having all the answers to these questions, but again, so that's seeking many perspectives, I'll say that the concept of weaving diversity and equity inclusion work into the wraparound approach that is inherent in MTSS work, as you put it in your email, makes good sense. And having a dedicated leader to guide the growth and direction of the work is required. When I say dedicated, I don't mean motivated or committed. I mean with the sole focus exclusively allocated to or intended for a particular service or purpose. This is not work that can be simply added to an educator or an administrator's extremely full workload. It requires focus, significant relational skills, time, resources, ongoing learning, and daily active engagement to be done well. That being said, I also wanted to respond to or ask some questions in response to the part of your email where you said you've been appraised of the equity work throughout the district. And I'm just curious about these things, and I'm asking to provide a DEI-informed framework for further discussion that may take place among the board or district leadership. I'm curious which stakeholders have been consulted. Was it the small, relatively homogeneous group of district leaders overseeing the work, or were various teachers and staff involved in the committee also asked about their experiences? Either those that have stayed engaged or those that initially signed on and have disengaged to find out why. Were the PTA leaders consulted to get feedback about their experience of serving on the committee, what worked and didn't work? Or maybe parents or students who've experienced harm due to perceived bias or discrimination? Were professionals with DEI credentials within the district or in surrounding districts interviewed to determine their perspectives and recommendations? For example, Lisa Kaiser served in the DEI facilitator role and moved on to Wayne Risa. Was she given an exit interview to determine gain insight from her vast institutional knowledge? Or has her new office been sought out for the free supports that they offer in education in these realms? And finally, were there people with any marginalized or underrepresented identities in the room to offer diverse perspectives about diversity, equity, and inclusion? This is a fundamental question because, like I said the last time, you don't know what you don't know, so it's important to have representation of various people who are impacted by the work, given their identity as an outsider.
Okay, your 3 minutes is up.
Okay,
Wrap it
thank
up,
you.
please.
I'll wrap up by saying I hope that the board and the superintendent and all the key decision makers continue to look deeper into this, get broad perspectives, and make this a priority in the budget, hiring, and policy decisions in the upcoming school year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last blue slip I have is for Brittany Johnson. Good evening.
First, I'd like to say thank you for allowing me time to express my feelings and concerns. I am Brittany Johnson, a parent, a very proud parent of a second grader here within the LPS district. I'm here tonight to also voice my concerns on the importance around the topic of having a designated leader for our DEI district initiatives. I believe that the DEI district initiatives should remain an initiative with designated leadership to assure that the mission is achieved. Moving the responsibility to a PTA and DEI committee, as well as our educators and administrative staff, will be wonderful in terms of the diversifying the outlook. But for a subject as important as this, there's leadership that is necessary and key in order to continue to see our initiatives move in the right direction. As a busy mom, wife, full-time employee, mother of two, volunteer within our school, coach, mentor, I couldn't imagine having such important topics that will shape our youth of the future falling on my plate, allowing for it to fall through the cracks. As a DEI ambassador myself within the company that I work with, I firsthand see the importance of structural leadership in these programs. I strongly believe that having someone who has a sole focus to see the advancement of our DEI mission is imperative. The Higher Education Recruitment Consortium shares my sentiment as well, acknowledging that the importance of making DEI a priority for every member of every school staff is imperative. That there is often a need that needs to be achieved with professional development, continued learning, and specific strategic leadership. Nancy Abersold, founder of the Higher Education Recruitment Consortium, said, "There is a knowledge gap that needs to be filled by educating the educators about barriers to inclusion. The goal in addressing these issues through education, dialogue, and sharing experiences is to create work and learning environment that are safe, respectful, equitable, and welcoming to all." I do believe that is achievable within LPS, with a designated leader for our DEI program, along with our PTA, DEI committee volunteers. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no other blue slips, and I don't see any other individuals in the audience, so we will move on with our agenda. That takes us to item 4, our consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any board member would like to have removed? Seeing none, may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Frank.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of May 1st, 2023. 5B, MHSAA membership resolution for 2023-2024.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford.
I thought that was coming off the agenda. That's what my note from Laura said. So maybe we need to remove the MHSAA from that motion. Is that correct, Mr. Eaton? Were they pulling off the MHSAA because they didn't have the resolution?
It's been mailed out.
So my note from Laura said it was coming off the agenda, so she redid the agenda, or are we still having the MHSAA?
We're still having.
Okay,
We're good then?
then we're good.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Wozniak. Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by, I forget.
Mrs. Bradford.
Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. That takes us now to item 6C, 40-year resolution. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bradford.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the following proposed resolution of appreciation for 41 years of service with the district for the following employee, Catherine Custard.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And are we hearing from Mrs. Keats? Or is it Ms.?
Or is,
Do you want me to
or
read
is
the
the resolution being
resolution?
read by Mrs. Bradford?
Do you want me to read the resolution?
Yeah, go ahead and read the resolution first.
Okay. 40-year resolution, Catherine Custard. Whereas the Board of Education is desirous of recognizing loyal and long-standing service to the Livonia Public Schools School District. And whereas it has come to the attention of the board that Catherine Custard completed 41 years of full-time employment in the Livonia Public Schools on August 31st, 2022. And whereas in an era where many and varied employment opportunities often result in numerous work assignments, it is rare to encounter employees who have remained loyal to employers for over 40 years. And whereas it is a testament to both the quality of the work environment in the Livonia Public Schools School District and the steadfastness and dedication of its workforce that Catherine has attained a 41-year record of employment with the school district. And whereas she has given of her talents, time, and efforts in fulfilling her many and varied responsibilities as an adult helper in the Whitman Child Care Center, a primary caregiver at Jackson Center, and a paraprofessional at Grant Elementary, Cass Elementary, Buchanan Elementary, and Coolidge Elementary. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby expresses appreciation and gratitude to Catherine Custard for her sincere and dedicated service to the Livonia Public Schools and extends its best wishes to Catherine on reaching this milestone in her professional career.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradford.
You're welcome.
Now we'll go to Mrs. Keats.
Yes, good evening. I'm thrilled to be able to bring Katie Custard's resolution for 40 years of service to LPS. That cannot be understated, to say the least. I had the pleasure of working with Katie for just a short time at Grant, so I can say I know her work ethic personally. She adored the students that she worked with. She was adored by the people whom she worked with. She was a leader when the Grant Center came from Buchanan for, I think I worked with her for 1, maybe 2 years there. People looked to her to lead, guide. She was always calm, cool, collected with those kiddos and treated them as if they were own. So to see that she has been with us for 40 years, at first I said, really? I couldn't believe it when I saw it. Just to know her, I was kind of in disbelief. But we are just so thankful for her service, and congratulations on a wonderful career. And I hope there's more years to come for Katie.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson. And while Katie was not able to be here this evening, we will be certain to deliver her beautiful crystal bowl, as you know, is our custom, as a thank you and just a small sign of appreciation from Livonia Public Schools to our amazing staff who earned this special milestone. So we are looking forward to that opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any other questions or comments? It's just amazing, particularly in our day and time now, for someone to stay with an employer for that long. If you do look at any of the research, they're talking people going into the job market now may change jobs anywhere between 10 and 15 times over their career. So this is really an amazing milestone, and congratulations.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Let's give her a round of applause.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to adopt the 40-year resolution. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you, and again, congratulations. That'll take us to item 6D, teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2022-23 school year to the teachers listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And Mr. Abate.
Yes, thank you. So the staff members who are presenting this evening have been selected to fill our needs in special education, specifically on our ASD programs. They are well qualified to fill these positions. They've been fully vetted through our interview process. We are confident they will perform at a high level and represent Livonia Public Schools in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. These positions have also been included in our 2022-2023 budget. We're pleased to be recommending these talented professionals to join our LPS family. And with your approval, we're excited to have them working with our students.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Any questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Jarvis? No.
President Johnson.
Yes, Mrs. Burton.
And I assume this is to fill a mid-year vacancy, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, because it is for this current school year.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6E, teacher for tenure. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Jarvis.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and acknowledge that tenure status has been granted to the following teacher effective on the respective date. Jill Mulville, September 2nd, 2022.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bradford, and this is Mrs. Keats.
Hello again. Our teacher for tenure on this agenda has successfully completed the district's requirements for probationary teachers, including years of service, evaluations, overall performance, and documentation of student growth. We have carefully reviewed all supporting materials along with a recommendation of our building administration and have verified that she should be granted tenure status with Livonia Public Schools. We wish to offer our congratulations for reaching this milestone and look forward to continued success with LPS.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Questions or comments from the board?
Congratulations.
Absolutely. We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to approve the teacher for tenure. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll?
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6F, leaves of absence. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Frank.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and approve the requests for leave of absence as listed below. Jamie Elwin, 2023-24 school year. Sarah Ray, 2023-24 school year. Stacy Rosner, 2023-24 school year.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Burton. And Mr. Abate, you guys in a tag team today?
I just, switch it back and forth, keep it interesting. So our leaves of absence, in your documentation, these folks have requested leave according to their collective bargaining agreements, and we simply ask you to please approve those leaves as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Burton, to approve the leaves of absence. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6G, resignations. This does not require a motion, and it is for board information, which then takes us to item 6H, retirements. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation for services rendered by Amal Ayash, Denise DeBias, Kimberly Fortner, Lisa Hissam, Betty Kirk, James Murphy, Sharon Scott, Janet Stack, Kelly Tadia, Mary Patricia Wright, and Elaine Yee.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta and Mrs. Keats.
Yes, tonight we honor and congratulate 11 members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools at the conclusion of the school year. As these staff members leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 288 years of experience. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank our retirees for their dedicated years of service that they have provided the students of LPS, and we ask the board to please adopt the attached resolutions of appreciation.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Any questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton?
It's just such a, this comes to us periodically throughout the whole year, and it's such a bittersweet resolution to pass. Inevitably, there are some folks that we know professionally on this list whenever it's presented to us, and some, as the case is now, personally. We just wish the folks who are on this document well in their next chapter, and thank you so very much for serving not only the students, but the families and coworkers of Livonia Public Schools. You will be truly missed.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton.
I will echo that. Again, it is that time of year where we have a few more names than is common, but we are absolutely thrilled for these folks to take the next step in their life's journey, and we are so grateful. You'll see anywhere from 15 to 20 years to, up to 37 years. As you talked about, President Johnson, that longevity, that commitment and dedication to our students in our district for so many years is something of which we are so grateful and so proud. So as we've seen many of these folks over the course of the past several weeks, I know they are feeling too some of that mixed emotion of being proud for a really strong career, but also ready to take that next step and enjoy life's journey. So we wish them well.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Acosta, to accept the resolutions for retirements. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations to all our retirees. That takes us now to item 7, which is our business matters. And 7A is contingency for robotics and LCTC renovation 2021 bond. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation from the owner's representative, Plant Moran Cressa, to approve additional contingency for the robotics and LCTC renovation project in the amount of $213,000.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, and we'll hear from Mr. Francis. Good evening.
Good evening, President Johnson. This recommendation for board approval of $213,000, which would be contingency dollars towards the LCTC and Robotics 2021 bond program, is being requested out of abundance of caution and proactively, knowing that going into the summer, which we will be finishing up that project and starting the school year a week earlier, we want to ensure that there are no slowdowns or shutdowns based upon any unforeseen issues that may cost dollars to fix and complete. And knowing that the board in July doesn't really have too much with regard to regular meetings. So I bring this recommendation to bump our original contingency on this project from 7% to 9%, which is, as mentioned, a total of $213,000, again, in a proactive manner, which just requires your approval before we could spend any dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton?
Mr. Francis, just for the benefit of the public, because we did discuss this at length in both our study session and our committee of the whole, these are contingency dollars to be used in case they are needed. And the normal, bumping this from 7 to 9% still keeps that contingency percentage within the normal range. The 7% was on the lower end when we first began this work, but bumping it to 9 is still within the normal range of the 7 to 10 that we typically put in for contingency. Is that correct?
That's all very accurate. This is, contingency is always something that is the just in case. Just like when a homeowner is going to do a home renovation project, they should always set aside a little bit more in case they open up that wall and find that surprise. This is the same thing. The purpose of the approval of these dollars are not to go out and spend them because we would want to. We would only spend them if we had to keep the project moving forward.
Okay. And any unused dollars would go back into our contingency fund for our bond work.
That is returned each year at the end when we wrap up each phase. We do return that money back to the bond.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, that was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million last year, at the end of the year?
From phase one, the summer 2022, this is 2023, yes, summer of 2022, yes, we returned just about $1 million.
Okay, okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to approve the contingency for robotics and LCTC renovations 2021 bond. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes. The motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7B, parking lot maintenance. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bradford?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve Titan Pavement, Waterford, Michigan, for parking lot maintenance in the total amount of $42,063, which includes contingency.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton. And once again, we'll hear from Mr. Francis.
Thank you. This is a recommendation for funds for regular asphalt parking lot maintenance. This would fill in cracks where they are a little bit larger, and coating over and getting paint, restriping lines on parking lots. The 12 buildings that will be touched are Buchanan, Cass, Coolidge, Cooper, Garfield, Grant, Hayes, Hoover, Randolph, Roosevelt, Johnson, and Jackson. This will all be standard asphalt maintenance, and the work will be completed through the summer and maybe even a little bit into the fall, depending on how it takes, but we want to have those ready for school to start in late August.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments from the board? Mr. Francis, just for the benefit of the public, this is coming out of the general fund, correct?
This is, yes, this is the general fund. Thank you. That's the budgetary information would be from the general fund.
And it's not sinking fund because it's not a...
That general type of maintenance is not an allowable expense under the sinking fund.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton, to approve the parking lot maintenance. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please? Mrs. Bradford and Mrs.
I got it upside down, sorry.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7C, appointment of auditor for 2022-2023. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Acosta?
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools appoint the firm of Plant Moran to audit and prepare the financial statements for Livonia Public Schools for the 2022-2023 school year.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And we'll hear from Mrs. Smith. Good evening.
Thank you, President Johnson, and thank you to the board for the opportunity to spend time with you both at our study session and the committee of the whole meeting last week, going over the services that will be provided by Plant Moran. As you know, they're an independent external auditor. We are required to hire an external auditor. They come in and test our internal controls. They make sure that the funds that we're receiving are spent in the way that they are intended to be spent. They confirm that we're following the law in how we're spending those funds. They also confirm that we're following our board policies and internal administrative procedures around purchasing. And then they also help us with the preparation of the financial statements. So for this service, their estimated fee for the 22-23 financial statements is $52,950, plus $1,500 for the implementation of GASB 96, which is related to subscription-based information technology agreements.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton.
A number of years ago, it was suggested that we look at another firm just to get a variety of opinions. That firm came back with the same ultimate opinion of high quality of Livonia Public Schools finance department and how we're handling all of our financial transactions. I am very comfortable staying with Plant Moran. They have provided terrific service. They've also provided, I know, a lot of backup, Mrs. Smith, for you and your department and any questions board members may have. But they have been a terrific source of information for us. I know they also provide some professional development for school board members and finance department personnel such as yourself. But they do such a terrific job for not only Livonia Public Schools, but throughout the state of Michigan for school districts, that I am very comfortable using them. And I'm glad that we are continuing to do so.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to approve the appointment of auditor for 2022-2023. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 7D, Wayne Risa 2023-2024 General Fund Operating Budget. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools adopt the resolution related to the general fund operating budget for the 2023-2024 school year for the Wayne County Regional Educational Service Agency, RESA.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. And once again, we'll turn to Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, President Johnson, and again, thank you to the board for the opportunity to go over the Wayne RESA budget, both at our study session and our committee meeting. During that time, we did have some questions that we asked of RESA. They were able to provide answers for us. We were able to have dialogue. One thing that we had discussed and we're happy to see in this proposed budget is those one-time payments to help reimburse non-reimbursed special ed transportation costs in our general fund, as well as some special education program costs in our general fund that are currently unreimbursed. So Wayne RESA has included that in their proposed budget. So based on our dialogue, both at the study session and the committee meeting, it's my understanding that the board's intent is to support the general fund budget by Wayne RESA. So a vote of approving this resolution will complete that resolution as followed and submit that to Wayne RESA on the board's behalf.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, to approve the Wayne RESA 2023-24 General Fund Operating Budget. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 7E, Garfield Greenhouse Change Order. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson?
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve additional funds for the Garfield Greenhouse project in the amount of $16,540.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And we'll hear from Mr. Francis on this one.
Yes, thank you. I want to first start by thanking the board for allowing us to get this onto the agenda this evening, because it is a time-sensitive item, and it actually was new to us as a change order towards I'll call it a long-running project that we've been working on in the district. It was that partnership between Healthy Livonia and Livonia Public Schools to erect a greenhouse at Garfield Community School. And that is, we are starting to see that light at the end of the tunnel. Just a real quick recap for the board members. You're all familiar with this project, and the board approved it actually officially for the greenhouse portion to Grospan in April of 2021. So we've been about 26, 25 months in from that time. So what we have here is an increase in the cost of the labor to install the greenhouse in the amount of $16,540. Having run into some headwinds in the project that were no fault of Grospan, they were at the ready to do the installation over the past couple of years, but having some difficulties with site work and some other issues, it took a very long time. As you recall, we lost a contractor who was supposed to start that site work over at Garfield Greenhouse project. So long story short is, over those many, many months, in which actually spanned more than 2 years, we are now ready. The first week of June, we have Grospan scheduled to come in and begin that installation of the greenhouse that we purchased from them. Therefore, I did not want to have another month-long delay on this project. So again, I really appreciate you indulging in putting this on tonight's agenda. That increase of $16,540 is the request I'm asking for the board to extend on the purchase order that we have with them. And that is an increase based upon just the past 2+ years of inflation, labor costs, wages, et cetera, for the company to install the project. Install, I should say, the greenhouse for this project.
Thank you, Mr. Francis.
This is being funded as additional information. Act 18, that is the funding that from Wayne Risa Special Education Center programming that was always originally part of it. So this is just be coming from the same fund.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments? Mrs. Burton.
Couple questions. Do we know when the greenhouse would be completed then? Will it be ready, basically, will it be ready for the fall's opening of school?
I'm a bit gun shy to ever say that this will be 100%
I know it's been a very long
done.
process.
Yes, I have a caveat that the plan would be yes, except for potentially any type of hang up, and I just bring it up with DTE because they are very busy and they can become behind. So we do have some power needs over there. But as far as this portion of it, yes, because they're going to come start in the first week of June, should be erected at that point. The site work, all we have left of site work is a little bit of concrete to do some sidewalks. That's not a big deal. The installation of this shouldn't be a big deal if the board does in fact approve this additional amount. So I just want to throw the caveat on is I can't control what DTE does with their scheduling.
Okay, but it looks good. Assuming that that goes smoothly, which
Yes,
is a big assumption, but
we're
assuming it goes smoothly. Then.
We're getting excited. It's going to be well worth it.
Okay.
It's just going to be a great item for the young adults over at the Garfield program.
Absolutely. All right.
And the community.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Francis, I have one or two. We've had the greenhouse itself for a period of time, have we not?
Yes. So there's 3 things, generally speaking, that we procured from Grospan. One, the actual greenhouse, obviously in parts and in pieces. They shipped that out right away. We took possession of it, and it's been stored in the district's warehouse. We also purchased the engineering plans for it and then the installation/labor to put it together.
Okay, great, thank you. Anything else? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to approve the Garfield Greenhouse change order. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes, President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Francis, for bringing that to us.
No, thank you for working with me. I know we were on the phone and emailing Mrs. Burton, Mr. President Johnson on Friday, and I appreciate you guys kind of jumping in and talking with me.
That now moves us to item 8, our instruction matters, and item 8A is adoption of high school psychology textbooks. May I have a motion, please?
Is that me? Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of Psychology in Your Life, 4th edition, digital access and class sets of physical textbooks from Norton High School for the Introduction to Psychology course for a cost of $37,315.20, which includes shipping and handling.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Frank, and we will hear from Mrs. O'Brien. Good evening.
Good evening, President Johnson. I am happy to share with you the textbook recommendation from a committee of high school teachers who have been working on this since 2019. They had a pause, obviously, as many of us did during COVID, and got back to work at looking at 9 different psychology textbooks, landing on Psychology in Your Life last year during the 21-22 school year. But the publisher informed them that they would be updating and having the newest edition in the school year of 2023. So after waiting as long as they had waited, they felt it was important to get the newest edition. They shared this with students. 75% of students found that they enjoyed the real life examples in the book and the conversations that they had with the starters in this publisher's book. So it was their #1 choice of our students. We are purchasing class sets of textbooks plus a building set of the student study guide and then 6 years of the digital license. These funds will come out of our secondary textbook funds, which have been supported by the Wayne County Enhancement Millage.
Thank you very much, Mrs. O'Brien. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton?
This question is really for the benefit of the public, for those who may not catch a whole lot of our textbook adoptions. But am I assuming that this is the same as it has been for many adoptions over many years, which is, as much as we're going toward a digital world, it is not any less expensive to purchase digital-only copies. Typically, what I've been finding over the last several years is we purchase the digital copies, they'll give us the physical books for free. We'll purchase the physical books, they'll give us the digital copies for free. So there's not a cost savings to doing away with the physical copy of the book.
Correct. They package them together.
Okay, so that's, we get the whole.
We get the book
we get
and the
both.
license.
Okay, so whichever one you like, whichever one works best for a student or a teacher, we've got them both, and we don't have a cost savings to separate them out.
No.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? I just want to thank the committee for the insight to wait when they heard that there was going to be a revision and not jump the gun and wait for the latest revision. It would be very easy to, that knee-jerk reaction is to take what's available at the time. But knowing that there was going to be an updated version, I think it was very prudent to wait and get the latest that we could. So
Absolutely. This was a patient group of teachers. They've been working on it a while. They decided to wait a little bit longer to get the newest.
yeah, being in the 3.5 years that they worked on it, that knee-jerk to get what's there at the time, and you just want to get that your work over with at that point. So we appreciate the committee waiting.
Me too.
All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Frank, to approve the adoption of high school psychology textbooks. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you again to the committee. That takes us to item 8B, grades 3 and 4, World Study Professional Development. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Frank.
Just 1 second. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of digital teacher resources and professional development vouchers for 100 teachers to attend a 30-hour training on Orton Gillingham morphology, our newly adopted word study curriculum for 3rd and 4th graders for a total cost of $120,000.
Support.
Stereo. We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And once again, we'll hear from Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you, President Johnson. Orton Gillingham has been a company that we have been working with since 2020, probably before that. They have a phonics and word study curriculum. We started training our kindergarten through 2nd grade teachers in their phonics and phonemic awareness programs, starting with a grant that Dr. Terriell and Dr. Dodge got. And then we provided the rest of the teachers with general funds, that training. It gives teachers the access to the teacher materials and to the platform. So over this last year, we've had teachers piloting their morphology, which is the next step in word study, and we would like to utilize that as our word study program for 3rd and 4th grade. Therefore, those teachers need those vouchers so they can go through the training and have access to those materials. These funds will be coming from our general funds because it's professional development.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Questions, comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to approve the grades 3 and 4 World Study Professional Development. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us now to item 8C, purchase of LCTC furniture and computers for graphics, design, digital imaging classroom. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of items from the Apple Store for education, institution, and interior environments to update the LCTC graphics design digital imaging classroom. The upgrade will include desks, chairs, iMac desktop computers, iPad Air tablets, iPad accessories, Apple charging cart, and Apple Care Plus for schools, for a total cost of $110,781.02.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, and we will hear tonight.
I changed seats.
You changed seats. We will hear from Mr. Etu. Good evening.
Good evening, President Johnson. Thank you very much. The Arts and Humanities Career Pathway of the Livonia Career Technical Center is excited of the opportunity to update and upgrade the digital imaging classroom, where courses in graphic design and digital imaging, digital illustration occur. So we're looking to implement some new desks, new chairs, a whole set of new 24-inch computers for our students, as well as tablets and teacher tablets and computer as well. It comes with a 3-year Apple Care Plus technology support for all this system, and we're recommending and asking the board for that approval this evening for approximately $110,781.
Thank you, Mr. Etu. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Burton.
The 61A grant that we're using to pay for this, is that, if I'm remembering correctly, is that for vocational education only?
It is. It's tied to career technical education. It's the 61A added cost, and grant funds for that can be used for direct student learning, which incorporates everything within this recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Mr. E2, I understand that the kids are working on old drafting tables now, is that correct?
Currently, they are. That's why it's time for an update and an upgrade within that classroom.
It's not really suitable for what, I mean, we've made do, but it's really not suitable for what they're doing now.
Correct. We're excited for the opportunity to take desks and equipment and chairs and put them in pods or in 4s or 2s. The higher top desks are mobile and can move around, so absolutely. It's more opportunity for project-based learning and team-based learning for those students.
The learning environment has certainly changed since we were
Yes, it
kids.
has.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonnefield. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Jarvis, supported by Mrs. Acosta, to approve the purchase of LCTC furniture and computers for graphics design, digital imaging classroom. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Ito.
Thank you.
That takes us to item 8D, expulsion of one secondary student. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bradford.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District expel one middle school student for violations of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education policies.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you. That takes us now to item 9, our hearing from board members. And item A is second reading of Board Policy IDF, Interscholastic Activities in Athletics, and removal of Board Policy IDFA, Interscholastic Athletics. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IDF, Interscholastic Activities and Athletics, and the removal of Board Policy IDFA, Interscholastic Athletics.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis. And is this going to be Mr. Etu?
I'm back at it. Yeah, this is a board policy that we've discussed several times, did the first reading. It's an opportunity to combine Board Policy IDF and Board Policy IDFA, therefore removing Board Policy IDFA. And then we made some minor language updates to the new Board Policy IDF of Instructional Program, Interscholastic Activities, and Athletics. And if you'd like, I can do a second reading for you.
Please.
Board Policy IDF, Instructional Program, Interscholastic Activities, and Athletics, reads as follows. The Board of Education recognizes the need for extracurricular and interscholastic activities and athletics and encourages student participation. The board further recognizes that participating in these activities and athletics carries with it the responsibility of good behavior in and out of school and being in good academic standing. Failure on the part of any student to meet this responsibility is cause for suspension or removal from participation. A program of interscholastic athletics shall be encouraged as an integral part of the total program of physical education. The interscholastic athletics program is designed for those students who have a particular interest, ability, and the desire to invest the time and energy required to participate in a Livonia Public Schools athletic program. The board shall review and approve by resolution the school district's participation and membership in the Michigan High School Athletic Association, MHSAA. In conjunction with this review, the board delegates to the superintendent or designee the responsibility for adherence to MHSAA's constitution and bylaws, as well as the supervision of MHSAA-related activities in accordance with the Code of Conduct in the school's student handbook. All interscholastic activities and athletics shall be conducted in accordance with law.
Thank you for that reading, Mr. Etu. Do we have questions or comments from the board? No. I know that you put in a lot of time on this. We had discussions over the last couple of months to fine-tune the language, so we appreciate all the work that was put in.
I appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Jarvis, to adopt the second reading of the Board Policy IDF, Interscholastic Activities and Athletics, and removal of Board Policy IDFA, Interscholastic Athletics. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us now to item 9B, second reading of Board Policy IFD, Library Media Centers and Classroom Libraries. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson?
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IFD, Library Media Centers and Classroom Libraries.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And is it
O'Brien.
Mrs. O'Brien is going to do this one? Thank you.
You are welcome, President Johnson. Yes, this is the second reading of this board policy, so we've talked about it in study session, committee of the whole, and at one other board meeting. This takes the board policy IFD and updates it and adds that classroom libraries fall under the same guidance as our media center selection. Would you like me to read it?
Please.
The Livonia Public School District establishes library media centers to provide and promote the intellectual, cultural, social, and ethical development of students, and to provide resources which extend and deepen the experiences encompassed in the curriculum. Library Media Center materials are determined through a process based on the American Libraries Association guidance for selection of books and other materials of learning which contribute to the growth of individual students. Selection for classroom libraries follows the same guidance criteria.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Frank.
Thank you. I appreciate, Mrs. O'Brien, all you and your staff's work on this. I think it was a thoughtful approach. You really dove into many of our policies and re-examined them. What is best for the students? What is best for our community? And so I really appreciate that. I think one of the things that you brought out in our study session was really important. Just said, parents, we encourage you. In our study session, we review with the students what your child is reading. If you have an objective to something that comes home, please send it back with the student. And so I think that it's important that we say as a board that we still believe in a parent's right to choose what books the students are reading. But we as a district need to provide a wide variety of books for different families that have different beliefs. And so I think it's really important in the work that you guys did to ensure that this is meaningful to everybody in the district. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. The media specialist and Mr. Casada did a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and then we as a group have looked at this and the administrative procedures. So thank you for sharing that.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to approve the second reading of Board Policy IFD and adopt the policy library media centers and classroom libraries. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes. That motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 9C, Wayne Risa Board Election, Designation of Representative. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt a resolution to designate board member Liz Jarvis as an electoral representative and board member Crystal Frank as an alternate electoral representative for the June 5th, 2023 Wayne Risa Board of Education election, and select Mary Blackman and Danielle Fundenberg as the candidates for whom the vote should be cast.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank. And okay, we don't need any discussion on this. We have talked about this. We have selected, Mrs. Jarvis has graciously agreed to be our representative, Mrs. Frank, our alternate, and to vote for the two candidates that we had before us. So if there's no other discussion, we have a motion to, let's see, adopt the resolution for the Wayne Risa Board election and a designation of our representatives by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 9D, approval for board member to take MASB classes. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bradford.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approved that Board Trustee Crystal Frank take MASB classes for a total cost of approximately $396.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Acosta. And are you going to speak to this,
Yes.
Mrs. Oquist?
Thank you, President Johnson. As you know, we are very supportive of our board members continuing their professional growth and education, as well as per board policy BBBC. It does require prior approval for any expenditures of this nature. So Mrs. Frank will be taking these classes for a total cost of $396, and we would support approval of this recommendation.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Questions, comments from the board? Once again, this is just another indication of the dedication of this board to continue to educate itself and improve itself. And Mrs. Frank was appointed recently. She's jumping right back into classes, so we appreciate it very much. Thank you. We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Acosta, to approve board member to take MASB classes. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you, and thank you again, Mrs. Frank. That takes us to item 9E, hearing from board members, and as it has been customary, I will now open up the floor to any board member who would like to say anything to the public. Crickets tonight?
Crickets.
I will say that we are quickly approaching our graduations. There's a lot going on in the district. I'm just hoping that our graduating seniors will be careful in this upcoming graduation season. Prom. Like I said, there's a lot of things going on. Please be very careful with whatever you choose to do. Also, I want to take the opportunity to thank our cabinet, our administrators, our staff, and all employees of this district that do such great things day in and day out for our community and especially our kiddos. Thank you so much for taking such good care of our kids. Mrs. Frank.
Thank you. I also wanted to just echo so many things were covered tonight in Mrs. Superintendent Oquist's review, but it has been our privilege, I think, as a board to be in the schools. We are so much we're in the school so much more at the end of the year when there's so many celebrations, and it just, to see all of what's going on in our district throughout many buildings. Many of us have been into several buildings that we're not typically in, and so it's just been an honor to see all the hard work and all of the things that are being done in the district. And so it's just been a really fun time to celebrate the hard work and the dedication of so many of our staff members and the hard work of the kids. So congratulations to everybody. It's been a fun time for us to see what's going on.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Mrs. Oquist.
I just wanted to just make a quick mention. On Friday, we had a longtime member of our school staff family pass away, Mr. Don Harris. He was a longtime educator hired in 1964, a longtime teacher in general and special education, and was a principal for many, many years at Jefferson and Harrison and Webster, and then retired from Johnson Elementary. So he lived a wonderful life, a wonderful human being, and I wanted to wish his wife of, I believe, 64 years, Margie, and his children, including his daughter Jody, who was a longtime teacher of ours as well, wish them our best and let them know that our hearts are with them. His services are this week, and we will continue to keep them in our hearts and in our prayers.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. I also wanted to thank the staff at Cooper for inviting me to come over on Wednesday and participate in their career day. I will be there all morning speaking with sixth graders about what it's like to be an attorney, to be a board member. I'm really looking forward to it. Like you said, Mrs. Frank, this is the time of year that we get into the schools. I did it last year. It was a ball, and I'm really looking forward to it again this Wednesday. So thank you to the Cooper staff for asking me over. Mrs. Acosta, I knew that would start bringing things out.
See, I know. I just wanted to thank the Churchill staff for inviting us to participate in their financial literacy fair. It was phenomenal. It was just so exciting to see how well executed it was, and all the volunteers that were there. And just, I hope to see this, hint, hint, not just at Churchill, but an offering. You know, I know it's a partnership that happens with the credit union, but it was fantastic. And I thank the Churchill staff for including us in this project.
Yeah, I tried to get over there, but unfortunately I was not able to make it, so. Okay, if there are, Mrs. Jarvis, why don't we just go down the line?
Earlier tonight, we mentioned that our elementary robotics teams, our first LEGO League teams, were competing this past weekend, and they represented our district very well. We had 5 teams compete. I believe 3 of them came home with bling. So they won some awards there, and one of them actually did place in 3rd place out of the entire competition. I don't have details on which team got which awards, so hopefully I'll be able to bring that next month. But I'm so proud of these guys. These are some of the most enthusiastic kids. I had the opportunity to see them at Buchanan at their STEAM night, and I have to tell you, they knocked my socks off. What a great group of kids. The whole evening was fabulous. But we have some interesting young people that we can look forward to watching over the next several years.
Outstanding, thank you. Anything else? No. All right, so we have come to the end of our agenda. It was a full agenda, some very nice things on our agenda tonight. And is there any other business to become before the board tonight? If not, then we will say good evening. Thank you.